All right, so welcome everyone. Holding by Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers. Again, one welcome. Holding by ethics of our fathers. Pirkei Avos, as it's known, chapter Mishnah 16. Good to be back. Hope everyone had a meaningful Passover. Again, we are holding by Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers, chapter 2. Mishnah 16. This is part 69. This could be actually the end of this Mishnah. We'll see. The Mishnah says, again, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, an evil eye, the evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. We spoke the last few weeks, or not last week, but the week before, about what it means, hatred over here. So he said, the name of Mor Rebbe, Arav Agon, Moshe Shlita should be well. And he brings down that hatred of another person means you don't like being around other people, right? They're happy being with themselves, right? Maybe they're too introverted, maybe they're shy, whatever it is, right? It's one of the 24 things stops a person from proper repentance, right? The Rambam says, and that is separating yourself from the community, which is never a good thing. And then we mentioned that a person may be conceited. They don't want to hang out with other people. They don't want to be around other people. They think they're God's gift to the world, so to speak. So therefore, they don't want to be around other people. Okay, right? That's, certainly not good, right? Being conceited, as we've mentioned many times before, the ways of the righteous, Orthodox Tzaddikim says, it's the base of all bad character traits, right? Which we said before. So says more Rebbe over here. Further, he says that someone who has hatred of others, as we said before, distances themselves from their peers, right? They certainly distance themselves. That there's no question. And what happens? What happens to them? They lose out. They lose out on many spiritual levels. Now, what does that mean? Means someone hates someone else, obviously. And we said before, the Torah tells us that a Jew is not allowed to hate another Jew in their hearts. Now, technically, they could hate a non-Jew. I mean, it's not a good thing, because having all this enmity, having all this, built up emotion, any psychologist will tell you it's certainly not a good thing, right? Keep it all inside, right? But again, as we've said, hating a Jew in your heart, you can hate what they do. You can despise their action, right? Let's say, but hating them, you're not allowed to do. Now, obviously, the question comes up, we've dealt with this, so we're not really going to deal with it here, but the question comes up, oh, what if they did, all these terrible things? Okay, we're not talking about that, right? If they've done something, horrific, so to speak, that is reprehensible, for sure you have to hate the act. I don't think that's any question, right? But, you could hate the person, right? That you could, if someone did something, so reprehensible, so to speak. Okay. God is not going to expect the person to love them. Or let's say better, at least not to hate them. Right? God's not going to expect that. Right? We live in this world, it's very clear. Very clear. That would be something impossible. That would literally be something impossible. So in theory, if someone could do it, probably the Messiah would come. Right? But that's not to be expected. Right? It shouldn't be expected. It'd be an impossibility. Literally, an impossibility. And God is not going to put someone in a situation just to fail. Right? In general, say, okay, if you do this, if you're able to overcome this, terrible thing that happened and you accept it and you love the other person, I mean, God's never going to respect that, right? Never going to expect that, right? We're not talking about something so heinous, so bad, so to speak. Again, someone was caused damage. Okay, it depends what it is, what's been done. For most things, I would say a person can't hate them. You're not allowed to hate them in your heart. You can hate the act, okay. But I mean, if it's something, physical abuse, psychological abuse, other things have caused like serious problems. Who says? Who says? So again, this is why a person needs, rabbinic supervision over here and understand why the Torah law, right? Because the Torah makes it very clear. The Torah says a Jew is not allowed to hate a Jew in their heart. Now, if I didn't know anything else, what would that tell me? That would tell me under all circumstances, I'm not allowed to hate anybody. Not allowed, let's say better. I'm not allowed to hate another Jew in my heart. Now, if I don't know anything else, right, I would say that applies in all cases. Now, everyone's going to jump up and down and say, how can that be? How can that be? Someone, let's say, I don't know, someone murdered someone. So the person, who's left picking up the pieces has to love the person that murdered, their loved one? Obviously not, right? That wouldn't make any sense. That wouldn't make any sense logically, right? Well, what do I have over here? I have a statement the Torah makes. The Torah does not tell me what the conditions are, right? Another example we always use, the Torah book of Leviticus, chapter 19. I'll get there one day. I don't know when, right? We'll get there one day. What does the Torah say? The Torah says that you have an obligation, a Jew has an obligation to rebuke another Jew. Very good. But then it says at the end of the verse, but you shouldn't bear the sin. Okay, what? So someone will say, I had someone tell me this, in all cases, no matter what happens, a Jew has an obligation to rebuke another Jew. That would be literal interpretation. All the Karaites out there would be very happy, right? Yeah, that's literal interpretation. No rabbinic anything. That's rabbinic. Sorry, that is Torah. That's what the Torah says. So someone says, according to any condition, a Jew is obligated to rebuke another Jew. Any case. Right? Now, why is that not true? Because what does the end of the verse say? The end of the verse tells me, lo tisalav chetz, but you don't bear the sin. What does not bearing the sin mean? There's a connection. There's an obvious connection between beginning of the verse and end of the verse, right? What's the obvious connection? If you rebuke somebody, you're not allowed, if you rebuke them, to sin at the same time. What does it mean to sin at the same time? Let's say you offend them. You rebuke them, and let's say you come on way too strong. Or let's say even better. You rebuke them, you start saying Lashon Hara against them. You do something as you're rebuking that causes a sin. That is in and of itself a sin. Yeah. So what does that do? So I would say, very simply, again, without knowing anything else, if you do something to sin while you're rebuking the person, that's not rebuke. That is forbidden to do. How do I know? Because that's what the Torah tells me. The Torah says what? The Torah says you don't bear the sin. What am I not bearing the sin for? What's the beginning of the verse tell me? The beginning of the verse tells me you have to rebuke. You have to rebuke your fellow Jew when you see him do something wrong. Okay. But what if a person sins in the process of rebuking them? Does that apply? Seemingly, that applies. You're not allowed to. Right? That's one case. Right? That's simple explanation. Now, a person will say, under any circumstances, a Jew has to rebuke another Jew. So you'll say, okay, now what if the other person doesn't listen? Or what if you know, let's say you know this person is very stubborn. No matter what rebuke you give, they won't listen. Not only that, they'll scoff, they'll mock, other things. And you won't fulfill your obligation of rebuking. Just the opposite. They're going to hate Torah more. Right? So maybe that applies. Maybe I wouldn't be allowed to rebuke because this person is going to take the rebuke. And they're not going to listen. Right? So if they're not going to listen, of course, again, simple explanation here. If they're not going to listen, do I have an obligation to rebuke? Right? So you say you don't know. In the end, you don't really know. Maybe they will listen. Right? Maybe they will listen. Maybe it depends how you rebuke. But what if you just fly off the handle? You don't know how to rebuke. Right? Now that's a claim by many, certainly in this generation, even previous generations. Nobody knows how to rebuke today. Now, if that would be the case, and no one really knows how to rebuke, let's just throw this out there, right? Then you tell me I'm exempt. You'd be exempt from rebuking somebody. Why? Because no one knows how to do it right. And because no one knows how to do it right, you don't have an obligation. Now, could there be a case, in theory, could there be a case where somebody's going to get rebuke? Let's say someone's going to give rebuke, even though they don't know what they're doing. The other person hears the rebuke. And the other person changes, or they apologize, or whatever. You can say, how do you know if you don't try? Good. Right? So there's always a doubt. But again, let's say you know the person. And you know the person well. So meaning, regardless of what you say, they'll never listen. They may be able to hear from someone else. They can't hear it from you. Right? Let's say when it comes to family. Right? Family's a very good example. Someone becomes religious, whatever it is. Other members of the family, since they know who they are, what they've done in the past, and this and that, don't want to listen. Why should they listen? Oh, it's another kick. Oh, fanatic. Oh, this. Oh, it'll pass. Oh, it's a phase. Right? Or even better. Anyone's the youngest member of a family. It doesn't matter by how many years. You're the youngest. And what happens when you're the youngest? Nobody listens. Nobody cares. You could be 75 years old. Person's older sibling is 78 years old. Right? Or 80 years old or whatever. You're still you'll still be the younger person. Younger sister, younger brother. Why should I listen to my younger brother? Why should I listen to my younger sister? 70 years old or young, whatever it is. There's a thing, youngest kid you don't listen to. There is something to be said, about that in the world. Now, I'm not going to say 100%, you never listen to a younger sibling, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying everybody would say that, right? But, anyone's a younger sibling, they know this. They know the fact that they're younger doesn't matter by how many years, right? All the more so younger by many years. Let's say a person, their next oldest sibling is 6 years older. Let's say 7 years old, even more. Right, they're going to take what you say seriously? Maybe. Certainly not when you're younger. I'm saying, even when you get older, oh, it's my younger brother. This is my younger sister. Yeah, whatever. Right, again, I'm not going to say across the board. But anyone who's a younger sibling, They kind of know this, right? This is something that is, this is well known. It's not a, again, like I say, it's 100%, right? But I think it's fairly high percentage where it doesn't matter how much older the person is, unless like they're really close in age, they look down on them at a certain level because they're younger. Well, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right by any stretch. Okay. So a person, let's say, they have an older sibling. They have an older sibling, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how old. They have an older sibling. Okay. Now, if they have an older sibling, if they have an older sibling and they know, sorry, and they know, and everyone else in the world knows, they're not going to listen to you. They're for sure not going to listen. Yeah. In that case, would I have an obligation to rebuke? Now, again, what does the Torah tell me? You rebuke as long as you don't bring sin upon you when you rebuke. I'm going to tell me the other person won't listen. The other person, many reasons why they won't listen. Right? They say, I don't have an obligation to rebuke. They're not going to listen, right? But again, you could ask the question, how do you know? How do you seriously know? You don't know, you have a doubt. Let's say you got years of experience over here. No matter what you say, they don't listen to anything. Right? Let's say years and years go by. And this is the case. So you're pretty confident. Right? You would bet all the money you don't have on the table, say they're not going to listen. They're not interested in listening. Right? They won't take your advice. Okay. Right? So 95% of the time, you're probably right. And they won't listen. Right? So then you tell me, okay. So if there's a pattern, it could be a negative pattern, doesn't matter. There's a pattern over here. They won't listen for whatever reason. Then I can assume in this case they also won't listen. It's not a big assumption, not a leap of faith over here. I can make a simple assumption. Good. Yeah. So you can say I'm exempt. Why am I exempt? And this is a lot more complicated. Right? This whole topic is a lot more complicated. Right? But why would I say I'm exempt? If I know they're not going to listen. Right? Maybe you tell me there's a 1% chance if you say it over this way, or you say it over that way, or something else. ChatGPT gives you, 20 different ways to say it. They'll tell you this is the best way to do it. This is the second best way to do it. You want to be more direct, say this way. Less direct this way. Less offensive this, whatever it is. Right? So you take a number of these things into consideration. Right? And then you give your group. Now, let's say you got a 1% chance. 3% chance. Maybe the person's actually going to listen. Right? In some cases, I'm not going to say all cases, certainly not all cases. In some cases, what happens? In some cases, you're exempt. Right? You're exempt. Right? Why? Because they're not going to listen. Right? It's not a question, well, just do it anyway. Right? In some cases, you don't have a choice. You have to rebuke. Doesn't matter if they're not going to listen. Doesn't matter if they're going to blaspheme. They're going to say all these negative things. There are times, regardless, you have to rebuke. Yeah, again, you can't speak Lashon Hara, and other things. Can't bear a sin because of it. But there are times you have to rebuke. That's it. You have to do it. But it's not in all cases. It's certainly not in all cases. But it's, again, a lot more complicated than it sounds. A lot more complicated. But what's the point? Before I lose myself in the parable here, what's the point? The point is, if you don't have interpretation here, which the Torah begs, if you don't have interpretation, you don't know what to do. And you don't know how to do it. Because you can say, well, maybe it's this way. Or maybe it's that way. Or maybe it's the third way. Or maybe they're all right. Maybe in certain cases, all three opinions are right. Right, according to the law. Maybe. Right? But looking at things at face value, again, doesn't mean anyone is stupid or mentally challenged or has a 25 IQ. Has nothing to do with that. What's the issue? The issue is, how do I look at it? Right? The issue is, what does it mean? Right? What in the world does it mean? That's the question. right? That is the question. Do I take it literally? Do I not take it literally? And if I take it literally, are there ramifications? Are there, let's say, exceptions? Would there be leniencies? Because again, this is a very good example. Because the Torah doesn't tell me anything. All the Torah tells me is that you surely have to rebuke your fellow Jew, right? And you shouldn't bear the sin. Okay. But it says very clear. And I had someone tell me this. This is what it says. Okay. Torah doesn't give me any ramifications. It doesn't give me any cases. It just makes a statement. And the statement is what? You have to surely rebuke. Okay. Then I threw out a whole bunch of scenarios, as we just mentioned. Person's like a little flabbergasted, like, why don't I know any of this? I say, because you never learned. If you'd learned for years, you know a lot of this, but you don't. So you're lacking information. Okay. Right? So you get, it takes years to get information. There's a lot of information out there to learn. Okay. Right? But, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to question. Right? It doesn't mean we don't have to get definitions. We have to get clarity. Okay. Then, when you ask the question, then the question is, okay, where's the answer? Where's the answer over here? Does it mean like this? Does it mean like that? Are there precedents? Are there not? Maybe some things apply. Maybe they don't. Right? That's what learning is. But there's a lot of information. Right? So, it's always funny. I shouldn't say funny, but it's funny, ironic. In certain ways, people, maybe will quote things or this and that, but they have no clue what it means. They have zero idea what it means. They'll say, I think it means this. Based on, it's what I think. Right? They were known by the rabbis, they're only men, and I'm a man, so my opinion is just as valid. Right? That's the point here. There are no definitions. Right? But if there are no definitions, I have to know what to do. It doesn't mean it's all ownerless over here. Right? Certainly not. And there is precedent, but again, there's a lot written on all these topics. Right? Rabbinic literature, what I'm supposed to do, how I'm supposed to do it, and all that, but you got to get the knowledge. It takes time to get the knowledge. Trust me, I've been looking for shortcuts for years. There are no shortcuts. You take it a day at a time. Right? A person learning Talmud, you take it one tractate at a time. Right? That's it. You take it step by step. It's not going to be, the whole thing, overnight. But again, what's the person going to think? Person's going to think my knowledge base, is just as valid as yours. Now, some people will be honest. Right? Some people will be honest and say, okay, I have the education of a 5-year-old. But I still think, what I say is valid. Right? And most people would even say that. Most people will say, whatever I know, this is what I do. I just, talking to someone the other day about it. It's ironic. It's ironic because people will say, you bring up questions of what people do, and they'll say, that doesn't matter, it's what we do. It's what we do. And someone over Passover tells me, they made a first Seder. They mentioned, if I mentioned in any class, some of them were going to make a first Seder. Very good. Right? Tuesday night, they make the first Seder. Okay. Now, the rest of the family, they made the first Seder somewhere. The rest of the family can't get together till the end of the week, right? Because of work, other commitments. So they make a second Seder, let's say Friday night, right? Or Saturday night, or whatever it is. They make a second Seder 3 days later, 4 days later. Now, there are 2 days of the festival, right? At the beginning of the festival, the end of the festival, right? Israel's only 1 day on each side, but whatever. Outside of Israel, there are 2 days. You have 2 days. So you have Tuesday night to Wednesday night, right? Tuesday night you make the Seder, Wednesday night you make a second Seder, right? Or Wednesday night to Thursday, whatever. Wednesday night to Thursday, make a Seder Wednesday night, make a second Seder Thursday night. It's not convenient Thursday night. So I'm going to make it Friday night. Or I'm going to make it Saturday night. Now, does that make any sense? Out of convenience, yeah, it makes sense. But if it's a 2-day festival, it means 2 consecutive days. Not one day in the middle. Right? First 2 days of the festival, Passover. First 2 days, the last 2 days, of Sukkot. Yeah, there are 2 consecutive days. There's no day in between. And I didn't go through all this, but I said, okay, you got 1 day, right? That was my answer. This is what we're gonna do. It wasn't an issue of I'll find a leniency like this or like, no, they're gonna do what they want to do. That's what they're gonna do. It's the wrong day. So what? So what? But we're gonna make a second Seder anyway. Or they brought up a number of times, your side, someone commemorating the day if somebody died. We're obligated to mourn for mother, father, sister, brother, God forbid, a child or a spouse. Yeah, the Hebrew date never changes. So they go by the English date. But the English date, you go by lunar calendar. That English date will change over time. Why? Because out of every 19-year cycle, you got 7 years. That's going to need a leap year. Because we go on a lunar calendar. Lunar calendar is 11 and a half days shorter than the solar calendar. So, as we saw by Passover has to be in the spring. Right? Sukkot has to be in the fall. Right? So you have to adjust. So you have to have an extra month. Right? So you have all these leap years in between. You have to have an extra month so the holidays fall at the same time. Right? Well, they'll make a big distinction there. By the Muslims, by Ramadan, it can be winter, spring, summer, or fall. Right? They also go on a lunar calendar, but they don't make any, they don't make any accommodations. So Ramadan can fall anytime during the year. Okay. Right? So I said to somebody, well, the Earth side comes out, we celebrate the English day. Okay. But I said, would you do that by Rosh Hashanah? Would you do that by Sukkot? You say, we're going to say, Yom Kippur, even better. Right? I say, last year was September 7th. So this year we're going to do it September 7th. Well, that's not the way it works on the calendar. Right? It's probably going to be a week later. Right? Maybe 2 weeks later. Right? Depending. I said, you never celebrate a different day that everyone else celebrates it. Right? So what was the answer? What was the obvious answer? The obvious answer is that's what I do. That's what I do. They're not arguing in Jewish law. They're arguing that's what I do. Based on, that's what I do. Based on what my heart tells me. Well, the Torah doesn't go by what your heart says. The Torah goes by what the Torah says. What I think. Nobody cares what I think. Right? Nobody cares what anyone else thinks. What does God think? What does God want? What are my obligations? That's the important thing. Right? But again, people will make the argument, it's written by man. All the laws, the rabbis added the Torah and this and that, it's written by man. Now, some people will make that argument, so they'll say, I can do what I want. They say their thing, my opinion. Okay. It's a different argument. But if someone doesn't even make that argument, they say, this is what I do. What's that called? Judaism made up in their own minds. That's what it is. Right? You're not going to convince them. I'm certainly not going to convince them. They're not going to be interested in my arguments one way or the other. Right? But they'll say, well, you do something else, this is what we do. Based on convenience, stupidity, whatever, somewhere in between. It's a crazy thing. Right? It's a crazy thing. But this is what some people do. And they don't make any bones about it. They don't care. It's true. It's not true. Blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. This is what I do. This is what I do. You don't like it. Okay, it's your choice. Right? It's your choice. Right? So again, back to rebuke. If rebuking someone, in some cases, since we don't know how to rebuke, certainly in this generation, or even in many previous generations, nonetheless, what would the obligation be? In some cases, you don't have to rebuke. Even if you say it the nicest way, right? And this and that. they still may take it the wrong way. And they still might not be interested. But again, there are times, and we're not delving into this topic, but there are times where a person would have an obligation regardless. Doesn't matter. Right? Totally doesn't matter. They will absolutely have an obligation. Right? And because they have an obligation, that's it. They can hate you, they can curse at you, they can say all kinds of nasty things. Okay. They can do that. Doesn't mean they're right. And it doesn't mean you never right to say it. You had a right to say it. You had a right to rebuke them. 100%. So whatever they say doesn't matter. Right? And this is something that people get stuck on because, they don't want to be offensive. They don't want people to take it the wrong way. They want to try and draw them close. Okay. But there are certain things there's no way getting around. Right? Someone gives you a hard time. Let's say they want you to do something on Shabbos. And you can't. You can't travel. You can't this. You can't that. They start saying all these offensive things. What are you supposed to do? You can answer back. You can say, well, God doesn't want me to do this. Oh, come on. You really think God's going to care if you rip toilet paper? You really think this? Right? They're going to put pressure. Why are they going to put pressure? Because they want you to do whatever they want you to do. Right? And what's the answer? You can't. Even if a parent would say, well, is it one of the 10 commandments? Is it one of the 10 commandments to honor your parents? Yeah, it is. Right? But it's very clear if your parent says to uproot one of the mitzvahs of the Torah and go against any mitzvah in the Torah, in general, you don't listen to them. It's a mitzvah not to listen to them. We understand this by juxtaposition of the verses. Right? When you have juxtaposition of the verses, usually there's a connection. Right? So, one place where it says keep the laws of Shabbos, where it's already mentioned about the laws of Shabbos before, the verse afterwards says honor your parents. Very good. Well, what's the connection? What's the connection? The connection is that if your parents said that's great Shabbos, you don't listen to them. Rashi says that on the spot. Other commentaries say that on the spot. There's a positive command not to listen to your parents in such a case. If they yell and they scream, they say, you have to honor you. So that is honoring you. Right? Say it's not funny. You have to honor me, blah, blah, blah. So if there's a choice, honoring a parent or doing what a parent says and keeping what God says, obviously God comes first. Right? You're going to say, no offense, but, this is what the Torah says. This is what our obligation is. This is what I'm supposed to do, so it doesn't matter. Right? I mean, try and do it the nicest way possible, but, in certain cases, the only thing that you can do is damage control. That's all you can do. They yell and they scream and they're this and they're that, put a lot of pressure, a lot of guilt. Jews are good at that, right? Jewish guilt. Put all this guilt on you, there's nothing you can do. You say, I'd love to do it, but I can't. It's a made-up religion, and you're a fanatic. Why can't you be reformed? They do these things. Why can't you be like this? Why can't you be normal? Well, is the Torah true or is it not true? Did God speak to the Jewish people or didn't speak to the Jewish people? Yeah, that's it. Other you want to play games. You don't want to play games. But you won't even get to that point of the conversation because they're too upset already trying to convince you to do what they want you to do. Now, again, people will say, but the Torah is supposed to unite people. Torah is not supposed to break apart, quote unquote, families. That's not what the goal of the Torah is. Right? What's the answer to that? That's true. That is not the goal. Torah should unite 100%. But if you don't keep the Torah right, if you don't keep it right, what's going to happen? People do whatever they want. So if you're trying to uphold the Torah, it's not a knock. It's not a knock on the person, even though they're making it a personal thing. And they'll say all these negative things about Torah and about God and about this and about that. Right? And the person gets all flustered. They're like, but that shouldn't be. right? But that's part of the test. That's part of the test. You're going to hang on to God, right? With all your might, with all your soul, so to speak, or you're going to cave in. Again, I'm not here to judge people who cave in. There's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure, right? Imagine, a family member gets married, Jewish family member gets married, they intermarry, right? And they're begging and pleading and this. Why can't you go to the wedding? What's the matter? My potential spouse and did anything wrong, and this. It's true. They didn't do anything wrong, right? You did something wrong, right? So now, if you believe in God and you believe in the Torah, and this is a travesty and mockery of Hashem, not even worse than that, one of the worst things that you can do. How can you expect me to go? Right? You as a Jew, how can they expect you to go? Because they don't care. They don't care. They want you to go. And they'll put out as much pressure as they can to convince you why family is more important. Right? Ever hear the expression, blood is thicker than water? I'm sure people have heard it. Yeah, okay. Blood is thicker than water, so. Yeah, but there's things you can't do. There are things that are forbidden. There are things you can't put your stamp of approval on. That's it. If there's a way around it, there's leniencies you could rely on if you had to. Okay. Not saying you want to, but let's say, sake of family peace or leniencies for certain things you can rely on. Okay. Certain things you can't. Certain things there's no way around. Right? There's no way around. We mentioned this many times, just beating a dead horse here. Right? But, many times I had to do certain things. It wasn't pretty, but there's no way around it. Right? There's no easy way around it. There's no, let's say better, there's no way around it, period. There's no way around it. Right? You can't, turn the Torah into a pretzel. Torah's not like silly putty, right? So to speak. Okay, if there's a leniency, even though if you don't want to rely on it, but it'd be for the sake of family, family peace and family harmony, you might have to do it. Might have to eat crow a little bit. It might be hard to do. Okay. Right? Some people say I still won't do it. Okay. Right? Sometimes there are ways around certain things. But sometimes you get in this position many times. Right? Many times. Too many times to count. And there is no way around it. There is no way around it. So what are you supposed to do? So the only question is how hard you're going to get slammed. That's the only question. Damage control. Right? I'm very good at that. Damage control. That's all you can do. Because you're never going to win the argument, A. And B, you're never going to come out smelling like a rose. Okay, and people say all kinds of things. Right? But, why are they saying it? Because they're hurt. Because they say, you should know better. Or they're saying that, this trumps what you do and what you believe and blah, blah, blah. And this is family. This is flesh and blood. Okay. This is flesh and blood. Very good. And in spiritual terms, is that non-Jew flesh and blood? In spiritual terms, I'd say physical terms. In spiritual terms, are they flesh and blood? No. Are they part of your family? No. Now again, I'm not saying spit on them every time you see them. I'm not going that far. Certainly not. Okay, but certain things you can't do. And there's no way around it. Yeah. If there's a way around it, okay. So then the question is, can I rely on this leniency, or not? Should I rely on that's why a person needs dastor. They need, someone they can go to, a mentor, a rabbinic figure somewhere. Like who knows these issues, know how to deal with these issues. And some of them are pretty sticky. They are pretty sticky. And some things, you can't get around. You can somewhat work around. Other things, there's nothing to do. So if there's nothing to do, people get all flustered. They say, oh, I'm saying this, and it's a whole big fight. And you're right. You can say, listen, this is what the Torah says. This is what God says. This is what I'm supposed to do. You're not making a personal thing. And that's it. You try and smooth it over, but probably a lot of times it won't be, and people will be offended, and, there's not much you can do. Again, you can try and smooth it over. It's not personal. It gets personal. Right? It definitely gets personal. Could the relationship be ruined? Yeah. And over time will get better? Probably not. But again, if there are things you can do, good. You try and do it as much as you can. Now, some things you don't want to do, and you would never want to do it, but you say in this case, okay, maybe you can make an exception, whatever. Doesn't matter. If we can stretch it to a certain point where it's still permissible, okay. If you can't, then there's nothing to do. And you will get hammered, right? Now, the question would come up on that, well, if God wants me to keep Torah, and he wants me to keep mitzvahs, why make it so hard? Why make everyone around come crashing down on you? So what's the answer? What's the simple answer? That's part of the test. That exactly is part of the test. Are you going to cave in? You're going to keep what God says, even when it's hard? Right? Or even better, people have trials. Speak about this all the time. Right? We just mentioned this. People have trials. Let's say not with family, maybe it's with health, or maybe, it's with, livelihood or different things. And a person feels like they're getting beaten down in life. Okay. Right? We've all been there. We've all gone through it. Different things. So people will say, look how much God hates me. Trials are not because of hate. Right? That's a mistake. Trials are not because of hate. Why does the person have trials? Because it makes them who they are. They have to overcome difficult things. Why? Because it could be, let's say, a person has dormant character trait God wants to get out of you, wants to squeeze it out of you. But in normal circumstances, a person would live the next 70, 80 years, whatever it is. Under normal circumstances, character traits aren't going to come out. It's just according to nature, won't come out that way. Right? So what does God do? So God orchestrates it in a certain way. Could be, a very hard thing to go through, a very difficult thing. But because the person goes through it, what happens? They use certain things inside, certain, character traits, or whatever you want to call it, certain things inside of them that they never thought they had. They never thought in a million years they'd be able to overcome whatever it is. And because they had to go through it, even if they still struggle with it at different levels, the fact they have to go through it, what happens, right? It now gives them the ability to draw on things they never thought they had. But it's more than that. What it does is it gives someone strength in an area they never thought, first of all, they never thought they needed, or they never came in contact with it, or whatever the case is. But now it's drawn out in a way where now you have to react, right? Now you have to live, with these new circumstances. Okay. So that being the case, that gives the person the ability to what? Help others that have gone through the same thing. Because other people can say, you don't know what I'm talking about, right? You can empathize. Person can always empathize, with other people about things they've gone through, or they're going through. Okay. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean they can give advice or whatever because they themselves never went through it. They themselves never had that hardship. They may be able to give general advice, some other things, but they won't be able to give heart-to-heart advice, like how to overcome this, overcome that, because they went through it. Right? Now, if a person went through it, it's a different ballgame. Right? Why is it a different ballgame? Because you yourself went through it. Right? So someone can't say, oh, you don't know where I'm coming from. Right? They won't be able to make that statement. Why won't they be able to make that statement? Because you went through it. You were in the trenches. Yeah, you went through a personal struggle. Whatever the personal struggle was. Or it could be multiple struggles, doesn't matter. Person went through whatever they went through. And they came out of it somehow. And they became stronger because of it. I was reading this book about Rabbi Bashkin. The whole story with him and how, a number of years ago, how, he got thrown in jail, all these accusations about what he was doing with shchita, with ritual slaughter, and they just like, lie after lie after lie. They put him in jail. First time offender, even if some of the charges were true, for like 27 years, which is like unheard of, like totally unheard of. And like I'm reading this book, and one of the first things, like when he was in jail, his first time incarcerated, that he asked one of his kids get him a translation of Chovos Avos, and part of Chovos Avos, duties of the heart, is Shar Bitachon, right? It's the gate of faith and belief in God. Yeah, and he said like he went through it like so many times. So many times, but it's like step after step after step. Like you see all these like negative accusations. I mean, totally bankrupted, the company, his company and other things, and even let's say, some of the things they said might have been true. I mean, they're so minor in a certain way. Wouldn't have got probation. Wouldn't even gone to jail, right? Wouldn't have even gone to jail. I mean, and a lot of things he says, he saw a lot of hashgacha pratis, a lot of divine providence for all the all the things that happened to him, as I'm going through this, and it's like, how can you not be broken? The whole system, in I don't say the whole system, whatever, part of the system certainly, in America is like totally corrupt. Right, totally corrupt. Give an example. The guy's going to flee the country, right? And he had every reason not to flee the country, whatever. So first time he's in jail, they don't want to give him any way out, before the trial, which is also unheard of, right? They want to give him any conditions for bail, right? Why? And this is part of the law that if you're a Jew, there's dual loyalty, right? You can always run to Israel. Right, dual loyalty, right? You can escape, and get to Israel, right? Now he's barely got any connection, according to him, anyway, right? And we're going to assume what he's saying is true. He's got like no connection to Israel, like very little. He doesn't have, too much family. Most of his family's in America. Like he's got no family. I was like, where am I going to go? Like, where in the world am I going to go? I mean, they made bail like millions of dollars for something that it was crazy. It was a whole crazy thing. It was a whole crazy thing. But each step along the afterlife, that's all it was, for the most part, right? And many of the things that they accused him of, he got exonerated from, right? They're like, they just like threw it out, this claim, that claim, the other claim, like they just totally threw it out because they don't like to stand on. But the person's at Muna, just he saw that it was just like they had it in for it. I mean, clearly. Clearly had it in for him. I mean, I'm through a third of the book already. Like, I mean, it's just unbelievable. Like one thing after another. Like they made one thing very clear. Yeah, like he's going to jail. Like that's it. Like, there's, they try to make all these plea bargains. The plea bargains are crazy, crazy. Like one of the last plea bargains. They give us, okay, we'll take it on from 15 years to jail to 12 and a half. Right, but obviously the God-fearing Jew is not going to plea bargain something, he didn't do. And they say like 98% of these things that go to trial, they lose. The prosecutors have it in for them. So they lose. Yeah. And like, he had no choice. Like, what's he going to do? Admit to guilt they never did? And whatever, all kinds of different things. But anyway, what's the point? What's the point? He went through unbelievable hardship. Unbelievable hardship. Yeah, but he went to the Chovos Avos many, many times, that gate, right? The gate of Emunah, right? Emunah and Bitachon, right? Which is like, the work on faith and belief in God and how God runs the world, right? And all that. And after everything's said and done, all the people that helped him and this and that, he got sentenced 27 years in prison, which is unheard of, right? Totally unheard of. I mean, whatever, he got his commute, thrown out eventually, right? But I mean, what he went through, but so now he speaks all over. He speaks all over on these things, on these topics, right? of faith and belief in God when you're in jail, when you're being prosecuted, when you're being, it's like blood libel. Like literally blood libel was going on. Yeah, and his company got totally bankrupt. Totally bankrupt. Right, because of the whole thing, and that's what they wanted. That's what the other side wanted. Right? Now, if somebody goes to something like that, they spend 2, 3, 5 years, fighting this thing, and eventually is in jail. Got out, I think, after 8 years, I think that was the case. But whatever. Yeah, he can go around giving people hope even in the darkest of times. Right? Why is that? What's the obvious reason? Because he himself went through hell. He himself went through absolute hell, no question. Absolutely no question. Yeah. So because of all the hardship, that makes him an expert to speak about it. Now again, is there any day, he didn't lose any hope, and he was like totally beaten down, he wanted to give up and this and that? I'm sure there were. But he was strong as fire. Strong as fire because he knew he was innocent. He was totally innocent, and this was just like a blood libel. A total blood libel. Even if they accuse him of what he did on some accounts. Yeah, let's say. Even if he would have, even if they would accuse him, which there were certain things he certainly didn't know about, but let's say they would have got him, on some of these things. He never would have went to jail. Never in a million years. Is he going to jail for this? He might have to pay a fine or, a big fine, whatever it is. Okay. But he ain't going to jail for it. He'll be put on probation. At best. And they threw, everything the kitchen sink at him. But he came out so strong, in spiritual terms because of it. That gives him the ability to speak about it. People in dire straits, he's a good address to go to. Yeah, he's a good address to go to. Why? Look what he went through. He went through, he went through horrific times. No question. You look at Jonathan Pollard, same thing. He spied for a ally, gave information, to the Israelis for, sensitive information that America didn't want to give them, for different reasons. It was an ally. And, some years before, there were 2 brothers that gave, intelligence to the Russians. They got 4 years in jail. 4 years, 5 years in jail, something like that. I think it was 4 years, if I remember correctly. They gave like life imprisonment with no chance of parole. They put him in solitary confinement for years. For one of the worst prisons in the world, spying for an ally. An ally. I can't imagine what the torture he went through. In so many different ways. So you go to somebody like that. Person wants strength to get hold of this person. They say, listen, I'm going through this, going through that. They can draw on their reservoir of what they went through and help the person. They don't have to be a psychologist here. I'm not talking about anything like that, but they can give the person strength because they were there. And they were in the trenches. And this guy for years was in solitary confinement. Imagine. That make any sense logically. Yeah. Spying for an ally? Even if it was sensitive information? Okay. But, 2 brothers got 4 years for spying for the Russians. Russians certainly not any ally by any stretch. Certainly back then. Like 30 years ago. Certainly not. It's Cold War. Not even close. They got 4 years. This guy gets solitary confinement for years. For years. In jail for 20 years, 30 years. Before he finally got out. Right? So somebody like that, somebody like that, yeah, he's got the ability to speak on it. You know why? Because he went through hell. Right? He came out of it. and he was strengthened, in many ways. Same thing. Age myself a little bit more. You talk about Natan Sharansky. Look what he went through. I got sent to Siberia, played all kinds of mind games with him and different things. Look what he suffered through and all these refusings, what they suffered through. They can also give strength to other people going through different hardships. Why? Very simple. They went through it. Right? Again, is each person going to say every day was great and, they worked on themselves and this and that, and they had no complaint, whatever, I'm sure. At some points, there were higher points and lower points. No question. Don't expect to be at a high point every single time and you get, you say, a person finds out maybe they're going to be released, this, that, and it's all mind games. They're all playing mind games. Say by Natan Sharansky, he played like chess in his mind to keep his mind fresh. Just get him to think. But what was their end goal? To break them. That was their end goal. So somebody like that went through unbelievable hardship, which you can't imagine. Any of these cases can't imagine. They have the ability to give strength to others. And what's the reason? Because they themselves went through it. And they became 10 times stronger. Because had they not gone through it in either case, had they not gone through their own personal hell, whatever it was, guess what happened? It gave them the ability to strengthen others. Give other people hope. They're going to say, listen, this person was in solitary confinement for 10 years, 5 years, whatever it was. When the person came out, they didn't break him. Came out intact. Because others got physical issues because of what they did to him. Okay, but, he's able to strengthen others. It doesn't mean they're a psychologist by any stretch. That's not the point. The point is God extracted from them. Now, why put them through it? I can't answer. They had to go through it. Why? Don't know. But what did it do to them? Now, some people could have broken them. They say, forget about God. I'm not going to do anything. Look what he's doing to me. Look at all the pain. Look at all the difficulty. Blah, blah, blah. Very good. But they came strengthened through what they went through. They never let go of God. They saw God miraculously in so many different ways. You have same stories, similar stories. People survived the Holocaust. They went through, unbelievable atrocities and what they saw and this and that. Right? But at the end of the day, they say, how can I not believe in God? Now, there's some people that would say, no possible way to believe in God. Look what God did over it. Look at how many people in my family wiped out in a horrific way, and all these Jews were wiped out in different things. They can say, I don't have any connection to God. Look what he did. Okay, not here to judge. That's true. There will be people who survived, had nothing to do with God and whatever. Hated God forever. That was it. But you had other people who were so strong that they say the only reason they survived is because of God himself. It's the only reason they survived. So if that's the only reason they survived, what? I don't have an obligation to thank him, to praise him. Keep Torah mitzvahs. Again, we're not here to judge people who don't. Right? Someone came to a great Hasidic Rebbe once and wanted a blessing. He said, see that guy with the tattoo over there? He's still religious. Go get a blessing from him. Right? And what's the reason? Because that person's strong as fire. Survived. Survived intact. With proper emunah. Proper faith and belief in God. Okay. Right? So that person's someone you can speak to. Right? A person like that you can speak to. Because they went through hell. They went through hardship. Now again, it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean, that they were whistling Dixie every day, right? And everything was, everything was easy, right? We're certainly not, we're certainly not saying that. But, but at the end of the day, At the end of the day, what are they saying? That they have the ability to give people strength. They have that ability, right? Why is it? Right? Why is it? Because they themselves went through it, right? And when someone goes through hardship, so again, you can ask the question, why did God put them through the hardship? Okay, the valid question, right? And the answer is we don't know. But what's the bottom line here? In all these cases, the bottom line in all these cases is that people who went through certain hardship, God extracted from them certain things in order for them obviously to overcome it, but they used certain powers and forces inside of themselves in order to overcome. Right? Now it forms who they are. So because of the experience and the hardship they went through, people go through similar hardship or whatever, they can give them strength. They have the ability to give them strength. Why is that? Very simple. They went through it. Now again, could other people give people strength in that same thing even if they never went through it? They could give. They can empathize, they give advice, different things if they never went through it. Okay. But I'm saying they can't give advice. But somebody who actually went through it, survived it, it might not have been easy, maybe had a lot of ups and downs. What did they do? Right? They were able to use certain strengths or whatever that they never thought they had in the first place. Now, because of that, what did it do? It formed who they are, made them who they are. Not only did it make them who they are, it gives them the ability to help others who go through something similar. Again, maybe they can't give it over as well, this, that, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? But they have now that ability. They have a newfound ability. Yeah, but that's very powerful. Extremely powerful. And the reason it is because the person can never say, you don't understand. You never went through it. Right? They're going to say, not true. They're going to say, not true. Why? They're going to say, because I did go through it. Right? You can't make that claim. You can't say, I don't know where you're coming from. I know exactly where you're coming from. Right? I met someone over Shabbos, very interesting. Someone introduced me to somebody that grew up not far from where I grew up. And so it's like, what are you doing here? How'd you get here? I said I went to the Jewish school, but it wasn't certainly wasn't Orthodox by any stretch. Right? And so I told him where I grew up. It's about 20 minutes, I guess, from where he grew up and whatever. And he said he got involved in a Jewish youth group, an Orthodox Jewish youth group, and they got him. Right? They got him, and now he's learning, now he's learning ancient Torah. Now he's here in Jerusalem, learning in the last 2 years, learning about Shuv Yeshiva for people that come back to Judaism, secular Jews come back to Judaism. And whatever, we're just, like discussing certain things or whatever, and it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. So, this person saw one of the same things I saw. I was much younger, obviously much younger. But, at the end of the day, you see, there are people certainly can, come out of it. But, once you've gone through, this is the point, once you've gone through certain things, and other people have gone through similar things, the person has the ability to help somebody else because they went through it. Now, if you didn't go through it, you give some level of advice. You can have a certain level of empathy, right? Let's say. You could do that, but someone's gone through the exact same thing and they overcame it, or maybe they had ups and downs. What does that do? That gives them much greater authority, right? It gives them much greater, they can be a genius and explain things regardless of whether they went through it or not, right? That's also true, right? But someone who went through it, and they actually went through it, You take somebody, I don't know, I'll give an example. You take someone had a gambling addiction, right? Gambling addiction. Or I read an article recently about someone who had a serious drug addiction. Serious drug addiction. He lost everything. Right? Eventually lost everything. Finally, it's been clean for, I don't know, last couple of years. But it affected his body. Totally affected his body. He's not that old. And it's like, he's had a number of strokes and heart attacks, whatever, because of what the drugs did to his body. Right? But now he's working with people that have similar issues that he went through. And he's giving advice from what he went through, what he lived through. So, I mean, he's lucky to be alive. Could have overdosed many times, right? Use this person as an example, right? But now he can talk to other people and, and guide them in different ways because he went through it. Much more powerful, right? Whatever the addiction is, if someone never went through it, okay, maybe you can help them in certain ways. But if you yourself have gone through it and you got help and you had ups and you had downs, or let's say you're able to overcome it, no matter what it was, you become an authority on that thing. And because of that, you have instant credibility. Instant credibility doesn't mean you know everything. No one's going to say, oh, look, this person knows everything, right? It's God's gift to the world. No, he's human, right? You can make mistakes. Okay. But I was talking to this guy, Friday night, and, saying that, in spiritual terms, where I came from, you're looking at the best, the best spiritual that came out of this place. Yeah, I was not really saying much, right? We was talking about nobody plus me. Okay. Right. But, but it's like, oh, you grew up there. I was like, yeah, I knew exactly where it was and whatever, so, there's hope, where people come from. Not everyone's going to have necessarily the same experience. Okay. Right. Maybe, similar, but any of these type of addictions, I think probably similar in many ways, but that gives them the ability, certainly gives them the ability to help others in the same situation. Right now, that's a pretty incredulous thing, because no one's ever going to say you don't know where I'm coming from. They went through it. Literally, they went through it and they suffered. Right? So you take, I don't know, a drug addiction, take gambling addiction, whatever it is. These things could lead a person to hit rock bottom, literally. Yeah, they lose everything. Eventually, let's say they pull their lives together. Good. Yeah, so they can advise other people who've gone through it. And a lot of times they do that, right? Because why should they make the same mistake you made, right? And you suffered with and all that. So, maybe, they'll be given pointers on what to do and what to say and other things. But, they themselves came out of it. So someone came out of the, came out of the muds, out of the dirt, so to speak. They say, yeah, listen, look at me. Yeah, I'm 50 years old, had multiple heart attacks and strokes. My body is shot, literally shot, in different ways. I had no connection to family, my kids, I'm slowly having, getting back to that, and different things. This person's life is wasted, been totally wasted in many ways. Yeah, but the person now sober, for the last year or so or more, and putting their life together. And now this person, besides whatever they're doing, they're helping others who've gone through the same thing. Now this person becomes an expert, right, in that thing. Why? Because they went through it. Now people come to it in different ways. Why a person got addicted to gambling or drugs or whatever. Not always going to be the same thing, right? Regardless of how they came to it, doesn't matter. The fact is, they had a problem, right? Had a drug addiction, had alcohol addiction, had whatever, gambling addiction. Yeah, it doesn't matter how they got there, right? How they got there doesn't really matter. Some ways probably similar, I would think other ways, maybe not. It doesn't matter. But that gives them absolute credibility to talk to other people about it. Because no one will say, you know where I'm coming from. You don't have any idea, you can't relate. Right? And what is the person going to say? Of course I can relate. I was there. I went through it. Yeah. I totally went through it. That gives them instant credibility. Now, whether the person wants to listen to them or not, or whatever, okay. Now, again, is that person going to say, yeah, every day was rosy? Everything was easy? Of course not. Right? The person's telling his story, lost everything. Literally lost everything. And it was gradual. Started, he had a great job, was making a lot of money, this and that. Right? And then, eventually he starts sleeping in. He's too high, can't work, this, works less, whatever. And then eventually he loses his job. Right? Eventually, let's say he loses his job, but he needs a fix. He needs that fix. Right? So, it goes step, but sometimes it can spiral very quickly. Okay. Regardless of what it is, that person can speak to others on the same thing. Right? It literally, person can say, wow, so how'd you deal with this? How did you, whatever. The person can say, well, this happened. Well, that happened. They can say, well, they're awe-inspired. They can say, well, how'd you get out of it? They tell the story, whatever it is. So they see they're not alone. They see that someone can relate to what they're going through. And this person lost people along the way because of, drug overdose and, and other things. And, he's trying to save people's lives. Literally. Regardless of what other work he's doing, he's trying to help other people. So that's a great thing. He's got what to give. Yeah, but he went through hardship, unbelievable hardship. That's no question. But this hardship, for whatever reason he had to go through it, now allows his experience, and a lot of it negative, but allows that negative experience to help others. They say, well, wouldn't it be better if he didn't have to go through that? Yeah. Wouldn't it be better, if he had other knowledge to be able to help people instead of that? Yes. 100%. That's not what happens. So, did God make him an alcoholic? He didn't make him an alcoholic or a drug addict. Life made him a drug addict. Yeah, for, different reasons. This guy was, he enjoyed it. He tried runs, he enjoyed the high, and then it spiraled. He never thought, oh, that, I can control it, whatever. Right? Also a big mistake. That's what people think. Oh, I can stop whenever I want. I don't need it, whatever. But the more the person had the high, you come crashing down when you don't have a high. So he always wanted to have that high. Very good, but it cost him. He thought he could control it. He kept saying over and over again, I thought I could control it. And what happened? He couldn't control it. And that killed him, almost literally killed him. Right? So that's one very solid piece of advice you give to people is this: don't think it's something you can control. Your system now craves it. It now wants it. Right? And wants that high, wants that thrill, so when you don't have that, what happens? You'll do what it takes to get it back. Right? So you say, okay, so on the weekend I'll be wasted, this and that, come Monday after, so, stop a little bit on Sunday, I'll get back to normal, be able to work, whatever. I'll do what I need to do. This worked for a while for this person. But again, he was delusional. He thought, yeah, I can control it. And I'll be able to control it. And guess what happened? Just the opposite. Controlled him. Totally controlled him. To the point where, his wife left him. He had no connection to his kids. And, life went on. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So somebody like that has the ability to tell over to others, right? That there's no question. He absolutely has that ability. And he should have that ability, right? But you could say, okay, but if he didn't go through it, he wouldn't be able to say very much. Okay. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's true. Doesn't matter. It gives him the ability to do it. Right? And now he wants to set the record straight. He wants to be better. He's coming back to Judaism much stronger. Etc. Right? It was estranged from Judaism for years. Coming back to Torah mitzvahs, grew up as an Orthodox Jew. Whatever. He just went astray, totally astray. So you say, well, it doesn't have to come to that. You're right. Doesn't have to come to that. Sometimes the person can only admit they have a problem when they hit rock bottom. Right? Avram Tversky, of blessed memory, was a tremendous rabbinic scholar, no question. But he also was what do you call it? An addiction expert, right, so to speak. And he had a common theme. He said it doesn't have to be this way, but usually it is. That a person can only understand that they need help once they've lost just about everything. He said it doesn't have to be that way, but people are stubborn, they don't want to get help, different things. So what do? They just keep getting worse. I think it'll pass, people accept them, whatever, and they end up, hitting a point where at the end of the day, kills them. Not literally, right? But they hit rock bottom. So I say it doesn't have to come to that, but usually it does. Usually when a person's lost just about everything, they have nothing else, then they admit. But again, it just causes havoc. So you take somebody like that. Now, the person gets a little bit of training. Can they be, a drug counselor for people? Yes. And he can be very good. Or she could be very good at it. Why? Because they went through it. And because of their different experiences, as we said before, will make them an expert to help others. But they never would have got to that point had they not gone through it. Right? So you say, okay, that's extreme. Why does someone have to, hit that point? God doesn't want you to hit that point. You think, well, God put them up to it. He didn't put them up to it. They had different trials and tribulations. And this was the end result. Right? This was the end result. Now, on the other hand, as we always say, a person can be broken by their trial. So, so you tell me, okay, God wants to extract whatever it is from them, okay, in order to give over to others, good. But they get broken in the process. Now, doesn't God know? God knows past, present, future. God knows that. Does he want them? Does he want them to be broken? No. He knows how much he can push them or whatever. But at the end of the day, we all have what we call life experience. Now, life experience comes with a lot of different things. A lot of different baggage. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. But I'm sure everybody has something that someone else has gone through. Right? We're not reinventing the wheel. Everyone, whatever we go through has been gone through by other people as well. The only question is how you deal with it. Right? And how, and how it's dealt with. But it's not anything new. Not like, drug addiction or pornography or other these things. These aren't new things. I've been around forever. People dabble into it more, less, whatever it is. Well, it's always been there. It's not like it's never been there. It's like, oh, this is a new thing for this cream puff generation. No, it's always been there. The question is, person exposed to it. Okay. right? Right? Try to get out of it. So people get out of it. They don't get, so far into it. It's very good. Other people, a lot of things get abused. A lot of things get abused. Yeah, you got people like any movie that comes out, they see it. Addiction to that. There are many things. Many things. But anything someone's gone through, and let's say they've overcome it. They've had ups and downs, but they overcome it. In some ways. That gives them the ability to help others. Why? Because again, that person's going to say, oh, you don't know what I'm talking about. Not true. Not true. You give advice, let's say, dealing with family because you went through it. You went through the hardship. Still going through the hardship. Right? But someone will say, okay, but you make mistakes along the way. Good. Everyone's going to make mistakes. Right? As we always say, knowing what to do and doing it, two different things. So I was telling this guy Friday night, I said, I try and give over as much as possible. That people should make the same mistakes. I've made over the years. Right? So that can help people. Why? Make the mistakes. Or admit the mistakes. Right? Again, doesn't mean, it doesn't mean situation's going to be easy. That's not what it means. Right? But, if someone understands, what they need to do, and they'll say, yeah, but look at the negativity. Look at the negativity. Everyone's coming down like a ton of bricks. Like a ton of bricks. Right? I'll give an example. I did a podcast. I didn't put it up, but it is up there on YouTube. I did a podcast a few weeks ago, basically about my life story, and it was whatever. It's like a 3-hour podcast, 2.5, 3 hours. So you can put it on like 1.5, 1.75 or whatever. Hear me like talk like Mickey Mouse, whatever. And whatever. Went through my life story, and the person asked me, different questions about Amunah and Bitachon and faith and belief in God and other things. Okay, right? But I said one of the things I said was anyone in this process, whether they come out of Christianity or they'll give a different religion or whatever it is, right? So one of the things, depending on the family structure, one of the things that can be extremely frustrating, this person said the exact same thing because he wants to convert. And he said, and he said, well, more frustrating things that I brought it up, is that, again, it's going to depend on the family structure, but a person should not necessarily expect anyone to ask you why you did it. Now, for a Christian, I understand. Right? I guess, what? Do you think I've been lied to? Someone told me. Father told them, I was like, what? Do you think I've been lied to by the church for the last 50 years? Yes. That's what his son said. Yes, you've been lied to. I get information. Want to see it? I can't believe they've lied to me. You want to look at the information? No. Okay. Yeah. Well, the person said, I've been searching and this, it didn't make sense or whatever. They didn't ask him the question. And this is how, I'm not going to say across the board, but probably a lot of times. They never asked the question, why'd you change? Why was I to change religion? Nobody asked the question. Right? Now, why is that? What's the simple reason? They won't hear the answer. Why don't they want to hear the answer? I shouldn't laugh. Why don't they want to hear the answer? Because that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. They're going to say, well, I got a question about my religion. What, do you think I've been lying to? Yes. Right? Because someone asked me many years ago, they said, why do these non-Jews want to convert? Right? No offense to any non-Jews listening there. Why would any non-Jew want to convert? That's what they asked me. Right? So I asked them back, right? It's always good to ask a question with a question. So I said, why would a secular Jew become religious? Now, this is a Jew, a secular Jew, very secular Jew. Yeah. So they asked me, okay, good question. But what's the reason? What's the reason a secular Jew grew up, let's say, middle class or upper middle class America? Why would they want to become an Orthodox Jew? Yeah, legitimate question, right? So I told the person, these people are searching for truth. And if Christianity is based, quote unquote, on Judaism, they're going to look to Judaism. I said, but these people are searching for truth. Anyone I've come in contact with, they're searching for truth. What does the Gemara say? Gemara makes very clear. You want to go on the right path, God will help you. You want to go on the wrong path, God won't stop you. Very good. Yes, I said they're searching for truth. So the person, because I can see their face right in front of me, the person looked me straight in the eye and said, come on, get real. That's what they said. Can't make this up. They're like, come on, get real. You couldn't imagine. Couldn't imagine a secular Jew searching for truth. A non-Jew searching for truth. It's not even on their horizon. Not even an afterthought. So come on, you say that's very simplistic. You say this person may be very shallow. Maybe. I can think of a lot of people very shallow when it comes to their ideas in Judaism. Okay. Well, that's what they said. That's what they said, clear as day. Like, who's searching for truth? Right now, they weren't saying there's no truth. They didn't make that claim. Yeah. They may have thought it, but they didn't make that claim. They just said we're searching for truth. Like, there are searchers out there. The person's much older. You would think be a little more connected, Judaism in different ways. But they're very far disconnected. Okay. So one of the things I mentioned in this podcast was a frustrating thing that happens to a lot of people is that nobody asks the question. Now, it could be family, ways, family dynamics the way they are. They don't care. Right? They don't care either way. Yeah, so you want to become more religious. Okay. Right? And Judaism's a little more different because it's more threatening to them. Right? A secular Jew, you became religious, it's like you're saying that they're not Jewish. I've heard this made, oh, you don't think I'm Jewish. I never said you weren't Jewish. Is your mother Jewish? Yeah, then you're Jewish. With any crazy conversions in previous generations? No. So you're Jewish. Okay. No, but you know what I mean. You don't think I'm, worthy or that. It has nothing to do with what I think. Either the Torah is true or not. True, you keep the Torah or not. That's it. Right? But why is it more threatening? Because the spark inside them is the Jew is saying, you don't think I'm good enough. You don't think I'm Jewish enough. That's what they're thinking. Literally, that's what they're thinking. And some of them will make fun or whatever because, they want to put you down and make themselves look better. Okay, but let's say this secular Jew became a Sikh. I got a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, that as a brother, that's a Sikh. Whatever, he's a Sikh. I asked him a couple of years ago, he was here. I haven't seen him in many years, so I asked him, I said, your brother still a Sikh? He said, yep, still a Sikh. Okay. Now, if a secular Jew becomes a Sikh or a Buddhist, let's say, we won't say Muslim, let's say Buddhist. Yeah, Muslim probably more threatening in different ways. Yeah. Is the secular Jew going to be that upset that you became a Buddhist? Yeah, probably not. Why, or a Sikh, let's say better. Why not? Because that doesn't speak to them. That doesn't threaten them. Right? In other words, they would never consider being a Buddhist or a Sikh. They're not going to, if at anything, maybe they're looking at Judaism, if that. But they're not going to feel threatened. Why? Because they don't have any connection to their lives. They've probably never seen a Buddhist or a Sikh in their life, let's say. They have no connection to it. Oh, but you're Jewish. And now you're keeping all these antiquated laws. A lot of them don't make sense, and who knows what. That's a lot more threatening. Why? Because the spark inside of them of being a Jew says, hey, how come you don't do that? When you come up with a person will come up with 1.5 million excuses. One, it's so old. Nobody really keeps it anyway. It's all man-made. Right? They have to listen to the rabbis and this and that. We'll come up with all kinds of answers, but what? But why? Why are they hostile? Why sometimes are they hostile? They're hostile because they don't want anyone telling them what to do. You don't have to say anything. All they have to do is dress like an Orthodox Jew. They're already offended. Yeah. And you think, I didn't say anything. I didn't open my mouth, right? If I open my mouth, I'm guilty, good, because I got a big mouth. Okay. I didn't open my mouth. I didn't say anything. Oh, you think this? Yeah, I do. But so, yeah, and like someone told me two Jews living together. They weren't, whatever. They're non-Jews, but it doesn't matter, right? They think one of them at least is Jewish or whatever. So anyway, person says, you probably think they're living in sin. I said, yeah, you're right. That's what I think. According to the Torah, 100% they're living in sin. I wasn't going to go into, no, they're both very not Jewish, and if they live together, that it's like they're married, and no, I'd go out, like, forget it, I wouldn't go anywhere. So I said, yeah, it's like, they're living in sin. Like, okay. Just like, testing you. He's like, come on, you think this is terrible? Yes, I do. You want to know why? No. But see, that's the frustrating part. The frustrating part is they don't care, right? That is, and they feel threatened. But the frustrating part really is they're never going to ask you the question. They're going to say, why did you become an Orthodox Jew? Right? In my case, very simple. They saw the way I was going anyway, and I was more into, Judaism and so whatever, not surprised. Many people not so surprised. Right? Okay. Well, the question still never came. And what's the obvious reason? It's a number of things. One is some people don't care. Okay. Okay, that's your choice. I made my choice. You make your choice. People live, whatever. Okay. Someone had an older relative, told me, okay, you made your choice. And this generation makes their choice. Say, I don't have to agree with it. They're somewhat more traditional in certain ways because they're older, right? But they say, you don't have to agree with it. But yeah, people make different choices. Yeah. Why do they make different choices? What's the choice based on? Right? Every person, or Chaim says in Leviticus chapter 18, we're going to have that class tomorrow, hopefully, get back on track. He says that every person in the world, doesn't say every Jew, says every person in the world has the ability to come to God. Yeah? Every person has the ability to come to God. That's why there are 80,000 different religions. So everybody's looking for spirituality. Now, they might have gone off the rails. They think, what they think is true. They don't think what we think is true. We think what we think is true. Okay. But everyone's gone off the rails. Right? Everyone else gone off the rails. Now, a lot of people out there have crazy ideas. So, like, seriously crazy ideas. Right? But Jews get threatened by other Jews because, again, of that spark inside of them that's telling them and screaming at them, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you keeping this? So they'll come up with 100 different excuses. Yeah, but they're not going to be threatened by a Christian. You became a Christian. Like, let's say a Jew becomes a Christian. Not going to be threatened by that, per se, because it doesn't speak to them. Yeah, you became a Buddhist. The person became a Hindu. The person became a Sikh. Whatever it is. That doesn't speak to them. Because they have no reference. They have no reference whatsoever. They wouldn't even consider being a Sikh. Whatever, in the first 10 things, they would, if they were going to change themselves, it's the number of 250,720. They'd never think of that. Right? But they're a Jew. Now, if they see another Orthodox Jew, they're going to think, oh, you think I'm inferior. You think I'm a guy. Well, not necessarily. Depends what you do. That's how you live your life. Right? So one of the things I mentioned is people are not going to necessarily ask the question. And why are they not going to ask the question? Because they're going to feel threatened. Because they're going to tell them, yeah, this didn't make sense, and that didn't make sense, and, all these other things. And then, like for a Christian, they go, why do you think I've been lied to all these years? You think the church is a bunch of liars, a bunch of fakers? Well, let me ask you a few questions. Does this make sense to you? Immaculate conception. Does it really make sense? Can you explain the Trinity to me? Can you explain what they do with this verse and that verse? And they don't want that conversation. Unless they're searching. It's like, oh, you think you have all the answers? They'll throw everything in the kitchen sink at you without actually addressing the problem. That's what missionaries are good at. You ask them a question, they don't have an answer. They go on to something else. They go on to like 3, 4 different topics, right? And then you got to tell them, like, give me an answer. Where's the answer? You can't just, go from topic to topic. Anyway, the point is, people aren't going to ask. Probably. Either because they don't care or they'll feel threatened by the answer. But, someone can say, come on, people are thinking. People are thinking today. Really? People are thinking about it, is there a God and what's life all about? Like, really? Just live your life. Life is good in general. But just live it. Don't think too much. Well, yours truly over here was told that many times when I was growing up. Why are you overthinking things? Just go and have fun. Enjoy life. Life's, totally in front of you. Why are you thinking so much? That's what some people say. Because what happens when you think too much? You have questions. What happens if there are no answers? Then what do you do? Then how do you deal with things? And there are things don't have answers. That started me on the journey. That this doesn't make sense. And that doesn't make sense. Right? My main question was, you do good in high school go to a good college, get married, have a couple kids, whatever. Maybe have a summer home, you go on vacation, you die, 65, you retire, you travel, you see the world, that's it. Kind of morbid way of looking at the world. But I said, what? It's not a question. Right? What was my question? My question was, what if you're born, your name is Rockefeller? Or your name is Getty? I think the family still have money. So you won the game already. Now, maybe they'll make you, go to college and you work in the business or you do this or whatever. But it's a whole different game. You're not struggling day in and day out. You got an easy life. Relatively easy life. That was one of my questions. You started off at the top. So what happened? It's supposed to be progressive. I didn't think of the question. It really didn't dawn on me. But now that I'm thinking about it, what about someone who won the lottery? Their lives change overnight. Probably for the worse, but let's say they won the lottery. They didn't have to go through struggles now. They won the lottery. Yeah. So that question never dawned on me. Why? Because a lot of people don't win the lottery. Okay. But that was a question. Now you can say, so you say, the answer is, some people have it easier, some people don't. Some people are born into riches. Okay. But there'll be ups and downs. You have more, you have less. Okay, but you start at the top. So the question is, if you start at the top, then what's the whole point? You already won the game. At that point, you won the game. Oh, no, maybe you're going to lose it, or maybe you're going to struggle, or maybe this, or maybe that. Okay, maybe. Right? That was one question. I had a whole bunch of questions, but what's the point? What's the point? People would say, you think too much. You know what happens when you think too much? You got a lot of questions. You got a lot of questions. Yeah, and they're not easy questions to answer. And sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes there's no answer. Right? The book of Job. Whole book about suffering. You can say it's his bad luck. It's what some of his friends said. Your bad luck. Maybe all these things happened to you because of the way the constellation was set up. Right? We're not going to go into that topic, but let's say that's the way the constellations were set up. And your bad luck. You're born in a messed up family. Let's say, I don't know. You did something. You must have done something. Or maybe like Amalek. There's nothing in the world. No supernatural. Stuff happens. Okay. But when you start asking questions, there are times you're not going to have answers. There'll be no answers. They'll say, this is a contradiction. You're right. What's the answer? Don't know. We believe people don't suffer for no reason. If a person's underage and they suffer, it must be because their soul, that's what the soul has to go through. Right? Reincarnation. Jewish concept. Reincarnation. But, at the end of the day, is it easy to see someone suffer? No. Could someone question the fact that, if God is really good, why does it happen? Yes. Person can question. And they'll say, where's the goodness, right? That's what all suffering's all about. Where's the good? Right? People don't see the goodness. As we mentioned many times. There's a million things to be thankful for. Okay. But they don't see it. Because they're getting beaten down in life. Good. So what's the way to look at the world? How can this be? Right? People say, I'm going to find out forever anyway, so why bother doing anything? Right? As Prophet Isaiah says, eat, drink, and be merry, lest tomorrow I die. It's okay. So why bother do anything? I'm going to find out forever anyway. You can easily look at life that way. No, Pirkei Avos he says in Duties of the Heart, makes it very clear. We don't do a quarter, a tenth, or a third of what you're supposed to do in the world. Right? So, what's the point? You get punished anyway, right? It's not going to be bad, right? But you got to try. You got to put your best foot forward. That's it. That's what you have to do. Right? That's why people say, I suffered so much. It's not really fair, this and that. Right? So I was telling someone different, Friday night. So I said, you make a chesed and effort, self-account before you go to sleep. Before your head hits the pillow. Before you pass out. Yeah, what did I do today? How did I talk with others? How did I serve God? How did I do this? Anyone get an A+? Literally, anyone get an A+? No. Maybe some people give themselves an A-, maybe a B+. Okay. Well, let's say on average we get a B- or a C. Let's say. I'm not gonna throw, we're not gonna throw ourselves under the bus and say every time we get an F. No, yeah, better days, worse days, okay. But if you get a C, let's say, or a B-, so you got a B-, okay, you did things pretty good, okay. But you still didn't do what you're supposed to do. You're still lacking over here. Now, is God mercy going to run out at some point? Couldn't God say, listen, this is how you serve me? You're getting a B- or below every day, right? So a person's going to say, well, I don't deserve to be punished this way. Now, a person can say, punishment's too strong. Yeah, I don't deserve to be punished this worse, this bad, let's say. But again, let's go back. You average a B-, that's pretty good. Right? Let's say, I'll be generous. You average a B-. If you average a B-, that means you still have ways to grow. That means you're still not doing what you're supposed to do, 100%. The problem's going to be a person's going to get whacked around in life. They're going to say, okay, I agree, I'm a B-. Or even better, I'm a C+. Whatever comes to me, I deserve, but I don't deserve this. This part is not fair. Now, that's what some people say. It's not fair. Like, who are you determining what's fair? Think if you were God. Right? I'm sure everyone's happy I'm not God. I turn people into frogs like tomorrow. Yeah, but think about it. This is the way you serve me. This is the way you pray. I see what's in your mind. This is what you're thinking. So you can say we can always be better, right? We always have more to work on, right? But the Chofetz Chaim says if I'm not doing a third, a tenth, a quarter, whatever it is, of the percent of what I should be doing, is there any reason to think that whatever I suffer through, that I don't deserve it? That a person doesn't deserve it? Very hard to say. Very, very hard to say. But what people will say is, yes, I do deserve it. There's no question. I deserve the hardship. Okay. But what are they going to say? They're going to say, P.S. You know what that means? I don't deserve it as bad as it is. Yeah, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve it as bad as it's coming. Huh. They'd be chutzpahdik to say I don't deserve it at all. That would be absolute chutzpah to say. They'll say I have it coming, no question. Okay, I have to work hard. I have to repent. I have to this. I have to that. Okay, God's going to take all that into account. The problem is going to be where someone's going to say, I don't have this coming to me. This is too much. This is way too much. If you think about it in God's terms, why is it too much? Nobody wants to think in these terms. People want to think they're okay. And at least they're trying. Okay. So you see, the more you try, people will say the harder it gets. Okay. What are you going to do? This is all you have. So we got to invoke divine mercy. We got to pray on a daily basis, except on Shabbos, right? When we ask for our needs, what do we say? You're the one in charge. You are the boss. You are the big boss. I don't come close to doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm trying. I've tried this, tried that. I mean, you got to be honest. You try and work on certain things. Okay. You may have ups, you may have downs, you may fail. Okay. But you want to put your best foot forward, regardless of what happens. Regardless of what happens, that's harder to do. Right? Why is it harder to do? Why is it harder to do? Because you have hardship. That's why it's harder to do. If everything's easy, would you pray the same? No. Person had a court case in 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is. It's going to be life or death. You're not going to sleep. You're not going to eat. You got to do whatever you can to overturn it. We don't live our lives like that. We don't think like that. We don't think what tomorrow's going to bring. We think, okay, I'll get up tomorrow, it'll be the same thing. Go to work, do this, do that, okay. Right? But they're not going to think of repercussions. They're going to think, oh, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. They don't want to have a death wish and think, okay, I'm going to sleep, I'm not waking up. Nope. At least not too many I know. Person walks out the door, they say, I'm not sure I'm coming back. I don't think so. Now, they may not come back. Nobody knows what today's going to bring, King Solomon says. Right? No one knows what tomorrow's going to bring. Right? So the Mishnah Pirkei Avos said before, you got to repent every day. You don't know the day of your death. Very good. So you have to pray every day. Right? Sorry, you have to repent every day. That's what it is. But the thing of hardship gets in the way. Because the hardship's not supposed to break a person. The hardship is to realize everything comes from God. And the Chaim says nothing bad ever comes from God, it's just the way we perceive it. Right? But we have to live that. As we said before, I'm reading this book on Shlomo Rabashkin and the whole story, what happened to him. And every step along the way is like someone else trying to just dig his grave. Put him in his grave. That's it. That's what the goal is. To bury him. They did. He lost everything. The person didn't give in. Totally refused to give in. And he was fighting something. Can't fight City Hall. Eventually get exonerated, but the whole point was they wanted to bury him. Yeah, prosecutors wanted to bury him. American system wanted to bury him. Yeah, and they had no evidence. According to this, very little evidence at all that should have got him into where he was. Very little. Certain things they might have had on him a little bit that he didn't know about. Okay. But the first time offense, it's not like he's not getting no bail. Or the bail was astronomical compared to what he did. And he had so many things against him. Million things against him. He just kept plugging. He just God, you're the one who runs the world. You're the one in charge. And he saw miracles left and right. Left and right. Okay. He went through a tremendous hardship. But made him who he was. Strengthened who he was. Other people would have been totally broken. Right? Absolutely broken. Right? And the reason is because it went through tremendous hardship. And everybody goes through it, whatever it is. Everybody has it. So that makes each person an expert to speak or to give strength to someone else because they've gone through it. Now, maybe they haven't processed all the information. Maybe they still have room to grow and to, deal with things. Okay. Right? But that gives someone the ability to help others going through the same thing. But they had to go through it in order to do that. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen to someone's a big expert and, big, what do you call it? An absolute genius in different things. It's because they themselves suffered and went through it. And because they went through it, guess what? It defines who we are. And most people would say, I'm glad I went through it because this is what happened. Now, other people would say, no, it destroyed me and this happened, the other thing happened. Okay. Right? Again, I'm not here to judge. But at the end of the day, it transforms a person. It should transform a person. It can break a person also. Right? It can totally break a person. But at the end of the day, everybody has something good to give to the world. God didn't create anybody for no reason. Everyone has their message they have to give to the world. Right? We don't know what it is. We know where our strengths are. We know where our weaknesses are. Right? We're given a message. God puts the soul in the body. Right? And he gives that message to the soul, whatever it's supposed to do, but then the soul forgets it once the person is born. Right? We can maybe guess maybe what we're doing here. Maybe. Might be right, might be not. Yeah, but they're going to be given an opportunity to use that strength. And that strength is going to come, it's going to come from within, but it's not going to come by itself. Sometimes that strength has to be, extradited, so to speak. Maybe like a hypodermic needle, but it has to come out. Right? That aspect of a person has to come out. How's it going to come out? God can do it many different ways. It can make a person struggle. It could be health. It could be livelihood. It could be, all kinds of things. But the person goes through, a number of things altogether. They go through health issues. They go through livelihood issues. They go through family issues. Let's say all three together. Right? Now, what happens? Let's say it strengthens the person like no tomorrow. It makes them very strong in emunah b'tachon, right? They have a lot of strength in faith and belief in God. Very good. Now, someone will say, well, why should I be closer to God? Look what happened to him or her. Right? But look at the end results. That person's not the same as they were 2 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. They're much stronger because they went through this. They say, but at the whole point of being close to God, you get burnt, right? We see this week's part we just read. Parsha Shmini, see what happens to Nadav and Avihu. Yeah, it said the closer you are to God, says the Korban Aaron. Right? Or Chaim HaKadosh quotes the Korban Aaron. By the sin of Nadav and Avihu, the closer you are to God, you get burnt. Literally, you can get burnt. Okay. And if you're not as close, you can also get burnt. Depending on what you've done. Right? So that being the case, everyone's given something in this world to do. And they have certain strength. Right? Not everyone has the same strength. Obviously, we don't have the same DNA. People are different in many different ways. But they're given strength. Nobody can say they don't have strength in anything. Or they're not good at anything. Everybody has. Right now, could that strength be used to help others? Could be. It could be God has to extract it. And the way God extracts it, it could be a person goes through tremendous hardship. Goes through tremendous hardship to extract it. Right? But again, even a person goes through it, there are people, I'm not going to say everybody, but there are people who are going to be very happy they went through it, even though they struggled and had hardship because of what it did to them and how it strengthened them and how they have the ability, even if they don't necessarily do it, but they have the ability to help others going through a similar thing. And they can help guide them, and other things. right? But in the natural, this is the point, in the natural course of things, according to nature, this strength never would have come out. Never would have come out unless God put them in a certain situation. Or they put themselves in a situation, doesn't matter, right? Whatever it is, they were put in certain situations, this is what happened. And this is how it came about. Right? Irrelevant how it happened. But it happened. Yeah, so it could be easier, it could be harder. The way it gets extracted. Either way, person now has these tools they never thought they had. And now they can use these tools to help others. So you tell me, but is that really the point? Is that really what God wants? You were given certain strength. Yeah, a certain perseverance, whatever it is. So a person can give that over to others. Or at least, even if they don't, they can strengthen themselves knowing that they went through it, they were able to come it, they had ups and downs, okay, but they were able to do it. Because God never puts a person in a situation they can't handle, even if we think we can't handle it. So there's a purpose. And at the end of the day, when people see what other people go through, they're very happy with what they have, not what someone else has. But what they have is very hard. Okay. When they look at other people, they're like, well, I'm glad I don't have that. I'm glad I don't have this. I'm glad I don't have the other thing. Okay. Very good. Should be thankful you don't have what the other person has, but it's very interesting. The hardship that they themselves go through, they're happy with that and not what someone else has. Yeah. They're very happy with what they have. Because nobody wants what someone else has. Because they say, oh, that'd be too hard for me. This would be too hard for me. Whatever it is. Even though what you went through was very hard. But again, each trial is for each person. Another person can have a similar trial, it's not the same. Because each person's created differently. Each person has different DNA. Each person's going to have a different way how they're going to react and this and that. Okay. But again, make no mistake, no person in this world is created for no reason. Even if, God forbid, a person had, let's say they had an unexpected child. They had an unexpected child. Let's say. Obviously, God allows them to be in the world. Okay. So you're going to say, what's the point? So the child also has a purpose. Otherwise, God wouldn't have allowed it to be in the world. What's the purpose? I have no idea. Whatever that child is. Whatever that child's supposed to be. But it's supposed to be here. For better or for worse. So everybody has that potential. Everybody. Jew or non-Jew. Right? We don't discriminate over it. Everyone's got that potential. Now, we're going to utilize that potential, right, to be the best we can be in whatever it is. Again, even if you're not helping someone directly, but, you yourself gone through it and it's transformed your life, it's also good. It's also very good. Because you're giving strength to yourself. And you're going through things that, let's say that, these other character traits would never come out if you're not gone through it. They say, couldn't have done it in a different way? Yeah, he could have. So why didn't he? I mean, every podcast, if I knew that, be world famous, be a prophet. Yeah, that'd be prophecy 101. But, not a prophet, not a son of a prophet. But at the end of the day, a person's going to take that and put that into the world. And that's part of the purpose. Right? Because each person has a different thing they need to do. But how do you know what the purpose is? You don't. But everyone knows what they're good at, and everyone's good at something. Right? Whether they can give it over or not doesn't matter, but it can transform a person who they are. That's the point. Right? That is exactly the point. All right, I want to stop here. It's good to be back on a normal, hopefully in a normal schedule coming up. So I want to thank everyone for coming. And when I ask any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There you got videos, Q&As, ethics of our fathers, book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN, at gmail.com. More should I ever